At the end of this lesson, you should be able to define a confined or enclosed space in construction, or name at least 3 confined spaces on a renovation site. The term confined or enclosed space has a specific meaning on a renovation site that differs somewhat from our ordinary use of this term. At a job site, a confined space has a restricted point of entry, such as a manhole or a ladder, and is a space that is not intended for lengthy human occupancy. By this definition, the cargo tank of a tanker truck would be considered a confined space, but the driver's cabin of the same truck would not be a confined space, even though it might be smaller in size than the cargo tank. Confined or enclosed spaces have numerous hazards of different kinds, including toxic or flammable gases or vapors, such as in sewage pits, oxygen-deficient atmospheres, materials that could engulf a worker, such as sand, equipment that could injure workers, such as unguarded power drives, including belts, pulleys, and rotating shafts, spaces whose internal shapes may create a hazard, for example, a bin with sloping walls at the base that may entrap the worker, and other known hazards such as elevated temperature or the potential for falls that could seriously injure a worker. In the fast-changing environment of the construction work site, workers may be exposed to a large number of confined spaces that pose safety hazards. Such spaces include ventilation and exhaust ducts, sewers, some crawl spaces and attics, underground utility vaults, and trenches. The first precaution you must take is to get trained so that you can recognize when a confined space is hazardous or may become hazardous. If the confined space potentially contains any serious hazard, a worker without training for this work should not enter it. Comprehensive confined space entry training is beyond the scope of the present training manual. However, at a minimum, you should be able to identify a hazardous confined space and understand that you and your co-workers must not work in such spaces without proper training, equipment, and management supervision. How confined spaces are regulated in construction depends on the hazards themselves. Workers in construction must comply with the general training and education requirements for confined spaces, which include taking necessary precautions when working in these spaces. Construction workers must also comply with certain confined space requirements for underground construction, underground electrical transmission and distribution work, excavations, and welding. In some cases, such as entering a sewage pit, your supervisor may have to issue a permit. In short, this standard requires communication and rescue procedures when a confined space may also contain a hazard.